Steve, welcome back to How to Be Irish. The episode today is a little bit different to what I usually put out. How to Be Irish is all about examining Irish society and culture, as you know. And the year, that is 2024, is coming to a close. And I wanted to take this time to reflect on some of the biggest news stories that have been coming out in Ireland. And I want to basically look at these news stories and see how they have been reflected in Irish culture and society. I'll be joined in the studio by RTE reporter Sheila Naughton to help me understand what events have had the biggest impact on our culture in 2024. I would love to hear your thoughts on this episode, so please do leave a comment if you do think there's an angle we missed or a story we failed to mention. Buin Tanavas. Sheila Naughton is a reporter and broadcaster with RTE, having just moved from Newstalk. She's from Blessington in County Wicklow, but has spent time living in both Monaghan and Tipperary, where she worked as a local journalist. She is a mental health advocate who spends her time doing CrossFit, high rocks, and has competed in strongwoman competitions. And most importantly, she's a cat mam to Pippa. Sheila, you're so welcome to the How to Be Irish studio. How are you getting on today?
Great, thank you.
Brilliant. Well, you've been very, very busy this year. You've been looking back on 2024 to see what the top news stories are. But before we dive into the specifics of that, I wanted to ask you, how has it been working in news in Ireland in 2024?
So we have a really different landscape, I think, now when it comes to news. And I also made the switch last year from local radio and local news to national news. And that's very, very different. As everybody will know, there's a lot of negative feedback that you get online when you work for certain companies. And that has definitely been something that's more prominent in 2024 and something that we have to be aware of as well when we're out reporting and we have maybe branded microphones or equipment and things like that. So that was something that I definitely didn't have, say, 7-8 years ago when I started into it. But it's been a busy year. That's both internationally and obviously in Ireland as well. The news cycle, it switches quickly. So when you start to go back over things, you realise how many things happened in certain months. And some months tend to be, because news is often bad, tend to be worse than others. And when we all move on, you forget that there's people still dealing with all of the things that have already happened this year. Now, there were some good things. It's been a big year, both nationally and internationally.
Oh, it has. And I know everyone was saying going into 2024 that it was the big year of elections, and Ireland was definitely part of that as well. But we'll look at those a little bit later on as they come up. So how we're going to tackle this is we're basically going to go through the year in a chronological order. Sheila and I have brainstormed some of the top stories, and we're going to look at how these may have impacted Irish society and culture. Sheila's going to come at it from a news perspective, so she's going to report on it, and then I might add a little bit of context to it around the society and culture side of things. So will we delve in, Sheila?
We will. Good luck.
Brilliant. Okay, so January may be off to a little bit of a slow start. What were the main stories or main story indeed in January of this year?
One of the main stories in January was this historic move that was made by the government, and that was to lodge a challenge in the European Court of Human Rights. That was over the UK's decision to bring in the Legacy Act. So for anybody that doesn't know, the Legacy Act, it basically was going to introduce forms of immunity for any perpetrators of the Troubles, and it was also going to stop any further cases or inquests that people might have with regards to the Troubles. Important to also highlight that that was the previous UK government. We have had elections since then, and things have slightly changed, but there was loads of questions. I remember when we were outside Cabinet, because it was one of the only things that we were talking about, was especially to the Taoiseach whenever he'd arrive, are you going to lodge an appeal? And they said this was something they were considering. It was, they were considering for a long, long time. And eventually they said that they were. It has moved on a little bit. Only in the last few days, Simon Harris has said that he does hope that the state's actually going to be able to drop the legal case against the British government, because he felt like the new administration in the UK was more willing to change the Legacy Act, or rather repeal it or replace it in some way. So it's not the end of the story there yet, but that was pretty historic.
And it was quite historic because it was very unusual that a state should take out a case against another state. I believe Ireland has already done this with the UK in 1978, and there's only then another 4 or so other cases of this. So
I think what it does is it reminds us that the Troubles and our history is still very much in the present. And you mentioned at the start that I lived up in Monaghan, and I think when I moved up there, it was when I realised that still for communities, particularly along the border, this is something that is still quite real. And in everyday life, being from Wicklow, I was somewhat detached from that. This was something in a history book.
We might move on to February next. The deposit return scheme was a big feature in February. Now, I know there's been a lot of talk about the deposit return scheme. It's pretty much been like probably a returning news story across the year. What have people been saying about this, Sheila?
This is quite a success story because now it is just part of normal life. You will not go to the shop here and not see people standing at the machines and using them. But at the start, it just felt like there was definitely teething problems. A lot of the time, the machines weren't working in certain places. People couldn't figure out how to work them. There was constantly problems with them, and people were having to travel to other places, and then they weren't. Obviously, then they weren't using them. I would put that down, though, possibly to teething problems at this point, because now we've seen that it is a success. There was also an interesting thing at the very start as well. I was sent out on a mission, and it was to hack the deposit return scheme because apparently you could do that. And I was asked, it was by one of the shows I was working on, to see if I could do it. And you had to photocopy new deposit return scheme symbols and barcodes, and you put them onto all the old bottles that you had, and you could put them into the tank, and you could get your receipts back out. Now, it failed on me the first time, but I just hadn't got it stuck on properly, and it worked the second time. So I technically stole 25 cents from Aldi, but it worked. I don't know if they've managed to fix that now, but also it's a lot of effort to go to, but I still did it.
For 25 cents, I know the cost of living crisis is bad, but I don't know if it's that bad, to be honest with you. It's a lot of effort. They hit their target of 750 million bottles at the end of November. So this has been something that's been in a load of countries across the EU for quite an amount of time. And people are almost like, I'm surprised that Ireland doesn't have this yet, or some form of it. But in my research, I found out that we used to have one in the 70s, but it was only for glass bottles. So it's funny now we brought it back. Obviously, plastic is so much more of a thing now than perhaps it was back in the 1970s, and it's a behavior change move when it comes to helping the environment.
Interestingly, when I was in Germany years ago, people were doing it, and the only thing I thought at the time was there was an awful lot of people who were homeless, they'd go around and they'd ask you for your bottle, or they'd ask if you were finished and pick them up. And they were taking them out of bins, and they actually started to design bins that were trying to deter people from putting their hands in as well. Another just aspect to this, which again, it actually comes back to, I suppose, people shouldn't need to have to go into a public bin to try to get 25 cents out of a bottle.
And sure, do you remember? I think it was 2001. The plastic bag levy was introduced as well, and that was absolute uproar at the time. People get used to these things, and it becomes part of their daily life, as you said.
So used to now, you will always bring your own shopping bag. I never leave it out of the shopping bag because I know I'm going to have to pay for it. So you will just have your own bottle with you. And we actually see more. You see more refill spaces around, whether it's universities or whatever now. So I think people are even trying to encourage that. And like you say, same with the smoking ban. We all get used to all of these things that are introduced.
That's it. It's what's it, 21 days to form a new habit. So that was probably where all the teething issues came out. I might move us on to March, because March was an extremely busy
So
month.
busy.
It was crazy. I mean, especially when it came to politics. I suppose the biggest story of March was the fact that Leo Varadkar resigned as Taoiseach and as leader of Fine Gael.
Yeah. I cannot explain to people what it's like when something like this happens in a newsroom. We kind of got a whisper that the Taoiseach's going to be making an important announcement. You'd probably want to be there. I thought, okay, you usually hear something. You've usually heard a rumbling that we think he's going to go in a week or two. We heard not a single thing until that morning. I think that was what was more shocking. Like, even the guys who, you journalists who are in Leinster House every single day, nobody in the hallways whispered this. But it turns out that actually Micheál Martin and Eamon Ryan, his coalition partners, they actually only found out a couple of hours before. So it really was the best kept secret. So people were rushing around, everybody was trying to find out. And then we were actually told, your current radio show, I was in News Talk at the time, your radio show that's on the Mint, they should stay on air, because it was a current affairs show. And we were like, he's going to resign. He announced that he was stepping down. It was on the 20th. A shock to both the press and his coalition party leaders. This was international news. And it also started the process then of finding a new Taoiseach and a new leader of Fine Gael. We also knew that an election was coming at some point. Now, at this point, they were still telling us it was going to be March. We knew that that wasn't the case, but we still thought it was a while yet. So we knew that he was doing this in time for an election. Among some of the quoted lines was, he obviously gave his reasons for it, and he said, my reasons for stepping down now are personal and political, but mainly political. I think at the time there was also a suggestion that, oh, something's going to emerge. We're going to find out why he's done this. And like that was the sense I got from the Vox Pops that I did and speaking to people in his area. They thought, we think there's something going to come out, or we hope there won't be something that comes out, because he actually had a huge personal vote there in Castleknock. People did like him regardless of politics. But I mean, nothing has. And he was around during the elections just now. And I was actually in Dublin West where his successor was elected, and very happy to talk and has written columns. So
Do you know what he's doing now, or is that even known to people?
well, I don't. I don't think we do. There's an assumption always that they will move on. A lot of these politicians were young when they step down, will go on to, something like Google or a tech company or a fiscal advisory type thing. But no. And during the elections, I know he was asked to be a contributor on a few things, but he told me, I said, are you more relaxed this year? He was like, well, didn't get out of my dressing gown till 4, so yes.
That was a huge news story. As you said, international. I was in Lisbon at the time, and you're on your holiday, you're not really tuning into news, but oh my God, we were on the train out to Cascais and we watched the address live on the train, and oh my God, it was...
So that's what we always wonder, because like I'm in news world, and like I talked about the election every chance I got, and then I'd come realize that none of my friends really cared as much as I did. They were like, okay. But was it for everybody else? Was it a big deal? Was it something that people stopped and were interested to hear about?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people knew, even if you're really not interested in politics, you know who Leo Varadkar is. Like, I feel like he had really made a name for himself, aside from being just the leader of the country. He was the first openly gay leader of the country. He'd been leader for a very long time as well, and very, very young. I think everyone was kind of curious. And as you said, no one had any idea. There was no whisperings of this. And I think that in itself probably made it as big a news story as it was.
Yeah, you're right. And it's actually, you touched on something there, because he was also quite central. Whether you agreed with what he did or not, he was central within gay marriage referendum, abortion referendum, Brexit, COVID. So that's why as well the world knew who he was too, because a lot of these historic things that happened, regardless of your thoughts on it, he was there.
Another aspect in March related to politics, and I don't know whether or not this maybe had something to do with Varadkar's resignation, was of course earlier on in the month on International Women's Day, there was 2 referendums that were held, and they both were rejected. There was no vote. And in fact, the second referendum, the family referendum, it had the highest no vote in any referendum in the history of the state. So I mean, a lot went wrong on this. Like, the government was pushing yes, yes. I think there was a huge amount of confusion from the public on it. Could you just give us a little bit more background on this one, Sheila?
Well, I say it divided people, but actually not there. Obviously, it didn't totally, because there was actually quite a significant majority that voted no in both. And I think you are right. I think it probably did signal maybe that the government wasn't reading the room right, and kind of wasn't listening to the electorate, and saying, when they were saying, we don't understand what you're asking us to vote on. And I think that was what came out. There was a lot of misinformation about what these things meant, but because we couldn't get the actual information, it made it really hard to dispel any of those rumours. So the care one was about the role of care within the home, and I think there was a point. It's obviously far more complicated than that, but people felt that it was basically putting all of the onus of care back onto the family. And actually, Leo Varadkar came out and said that. Whereas people felt that, no, the state does have responsibility in order to support us when it comes to caring for people. Also, when it came to anybody who had somebody in their family with a disability or additional needs, they felt like it didn't actually answer to what they would require either. This idea of it all falling back as a personal responsibility type thing, I think that was what kind of pushed people towards the no. And then the family one, that was where the durable relationships word came in. I had never heard of a durable relationship in my life. And then we had this misinformation about, well, people are going to come over with their 6 wives, and then we're going to have these people in this type of relationship with a mistress, they're going to gig. But the problem was, nobody could say, no, that won't happen, and this is why, because this is what this means. So I think that's where the conflict came in. But obviously then you had like the National Women's Council, and you had lots of groups that advocate for children's rights and children within the family, saying that this type of thing was needed because we needed to recognise every type of family. And we also needed to have the equality within the Constitution, and the Constitution matters in terms of language. They were the two sides of it, but obviously, as pointed out, overwhelmingly, it was in favour of the no's. So I think that was largely a language and an understanding issue than necessarily everyone being against it.
100% it was a language issue. I mean, I think in the care referendum, it was around the word or the verb strive, that the state would strive to support carers. And a lot of disability activists were not in support of that. They said they should do more than strive. And then when it came to the family referendum, again, as you said, it was the durable relationships. And what does durable mean in that
I
instance?
still don't really know.
No, I don't. I feel like even like people who were the most well read up on this probably couldn't answer the questions clearly, and it was a communication issue really at the end of the day. I find it was just kind of mad in a way, the fact that this was on International Women's Day of all days. It was chosen probably strategically, and it went down like a lead balloon really.
But you also had the side of people who thought they didn't want mother to be removed from the constitution too. So for those people to have it on that day, that would have been a straight no for them. Like they would have thought that's quite jarring. I don't want. So yeah, it was. But as you say, it was meant to be strategic. It was meant to be a symbol of support for women and greater equality. It was just muddled, and actually a lot of political parties fell down on this, because you did have Sinn Féin, you had the opposition, and you had the left leaning parties. They all supported this. The only, we've Aim to who didn't. So they all then had to come back, and they couldn't be totally critical of it and the government when they had supported it too. So there was a really interesting part for those parties that are in opposition.
Yeah, I felt like they were all standing around like those Spider-Men pointing at each other in a way, No one really knew where to point the blame in a sense.
I don't know. Do you listen? If you listen to Callan's kicks, he'll always have things being like, "Oh," where they all come together and they're like, "Well, we have to figure out a way that we can give out about this." It's like, God, let's brainstorm. So
Absolutely, I can imagine. God, Mary Lou and Simon and all them doing that together. My God, we might go on to another good news story. A huge one for Ireland this year was Cillian Murphy winning his Oscar for Best Actor in Oppenheimer. This was a huge news story, of course.
yeah, and he was on every red carpet, whether he liked it or not. Often looking like not. But I have to say, from my colleagues that went down, I didn't get to go to any of them. I don't do showbiz news, which is disappointing. But they said he always spoke to Irish media, took questions from Irish media, even when we had people over at the BAFTAs. So, not an Irish awards ceremony, things like that. So he's very gracious and always remembering his Irish roots. But yeah, this is the first time, and his first nomination as well. I don't know, did you see Oppenheimer?
I haven't seen it yet. I need to see it. I'm not great for the
Long.
films now, but yeah, I
Long.
need to see it.
I just felt this is not on his acting. I think I studied drama. I think he's a brilliant actor. I just did think there was a whole bit in the middle, and I was like, do we really need that? Do we need that hour? But the person I went with was like, we needed every minute of that. Yeah.
Well, films are just too long these days, like full
Yes, they
stop,
are.
I think, to be honest. You know what I mean? But you're right, he's very good at flying the flag for Ireland. He said in his acceptance speech, "I'm a very proud Irishman standing here tonight." And of course, he closed with a lovely Gurav Mila Mahagut, which sent all of the international media into an absolute tizzy trying to understand what in God's name could that mean altogether. Hello, we're just going to have a little sus biog, a little break. Thank you so much for listening so far. I've really been enjoying this episode with Sheila. It's definitely something different to what we usually do. And if you are enjoying it, please go over and rate the podcast. Make sure that you're also following it as well so that you don't miss when I put out an episode. And if you are enjoying it, share it with a friend, somebody who maybe likes a bit of current affairs, a bit of news, they might enjoy it. All right, back to the episode. Gurv Mila Mila Mahagwiv. So April, what was a notable news story in the month of April?
Well, we had the continuation of Leo Varadkar's resignation. So I actually ended up at Oris the night that he came to hand in his resignation, and it was lashing. Like, it was horrendous weather. And we were all stood outside like this, only to get a photo of him going in. That's all we were doing. But anyway, he tendered his resignation at the start of that month. And then Simon Harris, he had already been chosen as the leader. He was unopposed. So he ran in the leadership race. People had been whisperings about Jennifer Carroll McNeil might go for it, Pascal Donoghue might go for it, Helen McEntee. I remember I was at the press conference where Helen McEntee said something like, "Not this time." So that implies in the future, but not now. So yeah, ran unopposed him as the leader. So then he got elected as Taoiseach in April. I always love in the media when we have to be like the assumed Taoiseach and the supposed Taoiseach. We all know that that's what's going to happen and how it works, but you can't actually say it in case something goes wrong. Became the youngest Taoiseach at 37. And this is when this new energy
yes,
idea.
the TikTok Taoiseach is here,
TikTok Taoiseach, yeah. He was officially, made Taoiseach, and then he announced his cabinet. There was rumblings that there might be changes there, that Helen McEntee might get taken out of justice, although she had said in the media a number of times that she wanted to stay in justice. So that was the thing we were all waiting to see. none of those things happened. And he appointed Peter Burke as Minister for Enterprise, Trade and Employment, and Patrick O'Donovan as Minister for Further and Higher Education. So his previous roles. So yeah, that was the continuation of that story. And then then we moved into seeing our new Taoiseach everywhere all the time.
Yes, and still, although I feel like very much after the election, we have not seen that much of him at all.
They have to all need a time off. Like, I'm sorry.
Oh, I know. Was there any other stories in April?
There was a verdict returned in the Stardust inquest case. Now, that was going on for a year. The verdict of unlawful killing, it was returned into the inquest of 48 people who died. It was back in 1981 at a fire at the Stardust nightclub in Dublin. This is just for a recap for anyone who doesn't know, but all the people who died were ages between 16 and 27. And what happened was there was a 12-person jury, and they were brought in back in April 23. And so in 24, we finally got that verdict. Like, the relief for the families. I've been at a number of things now, whether it's commemoration events. I actually sat in on a few of that. You could sit in online on the court hearing, and it was going through every single picture of the tragedy. It was talking about the materials on the walls. Like, there's so much detail. That's why I feel like I won't do it justice if I go into all of it now. But they literally waited, what was it, 43 years to get some sort of a closure. So they found that the fire started, this is this current jury, they found that the fire started in the hot press in the main barn. It was caused by an electrical fault. And that is a really different contrast to the original finding, which was in 1982 in the Keene Tribunal, which found that the fire was probably caused deliberately. And that was contested by the families at the time, and it eventually was struck from the record back in 2009. The thing the families want to say was it was the surroundings and the environment within that was what caused it, not somebody setting it. So definitely a huge sense of justice eventually for these people. And you should see, like, some of these parents of these young people are not here anymore to even see this. And I actually went to, there was the first national commemoration in the Garden of Remembrance this year as well. There was just the poignant moments of, they laid a wreath for every single person all around the fountain in the Garden of Remembrance, and it was deadly silent. Like, even now, it's how much that impacts people, and just kind of shows how part of almost Irish society it is now.
It's one of those stories, I think, if you weren't alive at the time, you still know about it. Everyone knows what the Stardust fire is. And yeah, a very, very long wait to get that verdict. But I'm sure, as you said, a very important moment for the families of the victims and indeed the survivors as well.
They did get also a formal state apology as well.
Okay.
From the Taoiseach. So yeah.
There's definitely a theme of justice, I think, running throughout this year. It's probably jumping out. We might move on to May. I feel like there was some interesting stories in May. First one, maybe a little bit of a light story to start off on, is the portal that was connecting Dublin and New York. Now, I was never lucky enough to go and see it, but it wasn't even a week had passed and they already had to shut it down because people were
lashing their bits.
Yeah. Put it simply. I mean, what do you expect? Like, obviously, you put a portal in Dublin city centre, chaos is going to unfold.
I know, and like, there was lots of lovely things. I don't know, you probably saw all the stuff online of people being able to get friends and relatives to stand the other side of it and see each other. But then there was claims that people were feeling offended by, I suppose, if you have no choice but to see what someone decides to do, then maybe you would. But yeah, a good bit of mess. And I got a lot of mileage on social media. It was a point of fascination, but yes, it got restricted then. They had to restrict the hours of it because people were not behaving. But as you say, where like, they also, like, they put it in the middle of the city centre. I don't know what else they thought. Like, it just, there was videos of, like, often Gardaí having to pull people down from it and stuff.
Some of my favourite videos on TikTok around that time were just observers of people at the portal and the chaos that was unfolding there. In May is also a very big month for the Eurovision, and Ireland did very well in the Eurovision this year, but it wasn't without its controversy. What happened there, Sheila?
Yes, well, Bambi Thug placed 6th. I think we all had secretly thought that they might do it, but I think from speaking to, and I'm sure you know, there are Euro super fans in Ireland. Like,
absolutely, people know literally everything.
Fact. And we had one in the office, and he was brilliant. But they were really proud. They had such a following, and as you say, there was controversy around it. That was around the actual event itself. So there was things that happened backstage. You might know, but there was one of these singers that got,
yes, from the Netherlands, he
disqualified.
And I think he was
inappropriate behaviour.
He was supposed to be one of the favourites to win. So it was a year that was marred with a lot of controversy, and of course Israel being allowed to partake in the competition.
There was protests outside RTE, asking RTE not to broadcast it because Israel were involved. There was pressure on Bambi Thug, and they constantly were having to come out and not talk about the song or the contest, but talk about that. However, I do think they dealt with it well because they never shied away from also addressing it.
Bambi Thug, they came sixth, so that's the best we've done since Jedward with Lipstick in 2011. I think they might have come eighth then. So to be fair, like Ireland did very well, and Bambi Thug's song was really catchy, like very different, but I think a very catchy song at the same time.
Even the reaction here at home at the beginning was, God, I'm not sure. And as time went on, I think more and more people got behind them, got behind the song, got behind the performance and the look and everything. So I hope it saw a shift as well from just because something isn't Dana or
Yeah,
Linda Martin.
Johnny Logan or whatever.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that it's not good. And actually, it proved it did well. So it was great.
And another big story in May was that Ireland recognised the state of Palestine alongside Norway and Spain. So that was a huge moment for Ireland's, I suppose, international diplomatic relations.
Yeah, so while we are solely talking about the national issues here, Gaza, Israel, Lebanon, and now Syria, all of that is going on in the world. And we have factions of that here. Like, we have had protests all year, we've had demonstrations, we've had vigils. But this was one thing that Simon Harris made it official in Dáil on the 28th of May, with a number of Palestinians representatives present, that they were going to recognise the state of Palestine. He said that the onus is on every country and the EU to use every lever at its disposal to bring a ceasefire. And there was the Palestinian flag flown outside Leinster House. I suppose retrospectively, it might be said that that was just words, and from some who might not think that that was enough. However, we do see that Ireland is going to interject now in the International Courts of Justice case brought by South Africa. But Israel did respond to this and very unhappy with Ireland. So the Israeli ambassador to Ireland, Dana Ehrlich, who people will have heard on our national radio a lot, said that this was giving a prize for terrorism. So it was basically awarding Hamas for what they had done. And then also the Irish, the Spanish and the Norwegian ambassadors in Israel, they got reprimanded. They were brought in and they were shown videos of the brutality that Hamas had done to Israelis. So there was repercussions for that, as in then the Irish government came out and condemned that, saying that no diplomat should be treated like that. I think that we knew that was going to be the reaction, but still a big move, yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We might move along to June. This is when the elections really start, the second half of the year. So we had the local elections, the European Parliament elections, and also a Limerick mayoral election, the first of its kind. Could you give us a bit of a rundown of maybe a few of the key takeaways from those elections during the year?
Yeah, so this was the year of elections. We're going to have a presidential next year. But the locals, so they were held on the 7th of June, a Friday, which also wasn't that welcome because it was also one of the days of one of the Leaving Cert exams. So people were saying that wasn't fair on students. But anyway, just to break it down for the locals, Fianna Fáil won 248 seats. They lost 31. Fine Gael 245. They lost 10. And Sinn Féin 102. They gained 21. I suppose people were saying that was a victory for Sinn Féin. They went up considerably, but it was also pointed out that they had a very, very bad previous local election. So it kind of, with the momentum and the figures that they've been getting in the polls, it would have been expected that it would have gone up. And you don't really see it here, but the downfall of the Greens kind of was alluded to maybe here as well. They lost a lot of their seats. I think there was one part of Dublin, was it Dublin, Fingal, East or West? One of them, they lost all of their seats. So that kind of was a sense of foreboding. And that actually continued into the Europeans as well for the Greens.
It did, because it was Grace O'Sullivan and Kieran Cuff both lost their seats, Green MEPs. And of course, Claire Daly and Mick Wallace also lost theirs, and they then ran in the general election as well. So
Chris McManus as well of Sinn Féin. So now, interestingly, because he was brought in as the substitute for Matt Carthy when he left and came to the Dáil, so he actually hadn't been elected but the first time round, but quite a significant number of casualties. And the Greens, that was them wiped out of the European Parliament as well.
Yeah, I suppose a bit of a foreboding for what was to come in late November. Another huge court case, which was probably one of the biggest stories of summer in Ireland this year, was, of course, the Natasha O'Brien and Cathal Crotty case in Limerick. Could you remind us what happened there with that?
Yeah, so Cathal Crotty, he was a serving member of the Defence Forces, and he basically walked free. He got a fully suspended sentence, a 3 year suspended sentence, after attacking Natasha O'Brien. The 22-year-old, he was from Ardnacrusha in County Clare. He did plead guilty to assaulting Natasha O'Brien back in Limerick in 2022. People will remember this, I think, particularly because of this phrase that he Snapchatted, and it was two to put her down, two to put her out, and that was in reference to beating up Natasha. And when that ruling came out, there was outrage across the country. Protests were organised, rallies were organised. Natasha O'Brien was on a number of media platforms talking about the outcome, what she thought that said, how dangerous she felt that was. Direct calls on the Justice Minister to make Ireland safer, particularly for women, but of any type of violence like that. And Judge O'Donnell, who was the judge who did this, received heavy criticism because he told the court that the reason that he didn't want to give him Cathal Crotty a custodial sentence was because it would impact his career in the army. And I think then when Natasha came out, her thing was, but why shouldn't it when he has done something like that? And these are supposed to be the people that protect us. There was attempts to speak to the Crottys and the family, and they weren't well received. That's documented in the media as well. But ultimately, it did lead to his dismissal back in July by the Defence Forces. So he was dismissed. And since then, we'll have seen Natasha O'Brien actually speaking out on a number of cases, one that we'll come to later in relation to Nikita Hampton with Conor McGregor. So she's kind of become a bit of a face for gender-based violence, violence against women, and the justice system.
She's an incredible speaker and an advocate for, I suppose, rights when it comes to gender-based violence, which I think this case really brought it to light, just how unfair the justice system is when it comes to victims of gender-based violence. It's brought that to light. It was amazing to see the country get behind her like that. I mean, rightly so. And it really did just kind of inspire people, because oftentimes the summer can be viewed as a very quiet time when it comes to news. A lot of people are on holidays, they're distracted, but I really just did not feel like that was the case at all. With this summer. There was a lot of stories. I might move us on to July. Another huge story of the year and ongoing is, of course, all of the public disorder taking place at the Crown Paints former factory in Coolock. Could you update us on that story and, I suppose, where it stands at the moment?
The conflict, or rather the public disorder, we all saw started in July, but this was ongoing from March. There was a protest camp that was placed outside. Now, they were peaceful, but there was always an encampment there for a number of months. But there was one day where the contractor tried to begin work. This was going to be a centre for asylum seekers. It was going to be a mix of families, women and children, single men. The community were very much against that. They felt they didn't have the facilities, the resources. There was questions as to why they're often placed in disadvantaged areas. There was questions around that, and people saying that they couldn't even get their children into GPs or getting them additional help in schools. So that was the reasoning behind it, but that, as we all know, escalated, and we saw rocks, glass bottles, fireworks thrown at Gardaí. I was there. There was people, the first night they were getting pepper sprayed by Gardaí, so the next times they came back they had face shields. The public order unit was out. There was verbal abuse, and it would spike up at certain points, and then it would be calm for a couple of hours. And there was petrol bombs, mattresses were set on fire, there was damage to a JCB, there was disturbances throughout the day. The roads were closed off. Like it just caused a huge level of disruption, and it really, really echoed what had happened at the Dublin riots. Obviously, it didn't get to that level where we saw like mass looting and the huge damage there to the city, but in terms of the disruption and the amount of personnel it took from Gardaí, it was one of the biggest stories of the year. And I think even as journalists, often we would be nervous about going out there at times.
I've watched a few reports on it. I was looking at one, RT Investigates one, and I mean, the racist abuse hurled at the security guards working there, trying to protect the site. As you said, people like throwing things like petrol bombs. I think one of the security guards he was hit in the face by a metal pipe. caused them to go unconscious. I mean, a really shameful thing to look at as an Irish person, and really horrible things being said with regards to asylum seekers, people who are in extremely vulnerable positions coming to this country, and to feel like they are going to receive that sort of abuse at them if they were to be moved into the centre. Like,
The government still wants this to be used as that centre. So, and I mean, we only saw there last week down at Lissy Woolen down in the Midlands. There's people in that centre there, and it was broken into and attacks there, and that was with people inside. At least there was nobody in Crown Paints when these things were happening.
well, this has been kind of a story that's been popping up all over the country with regards to wider discussion around immigration in Ireland, and groups of people from often far right groups who are not happy with it and are perhaps using it to cause havoc, hurl abuse, use violence in these places, and a lot of misinformation is often surrounding these events as well. So I think it's a huge challenge for the Gardaí and for the Irish government and how they're going to manage this going forward. I might move us along to August. One really big happy story when it comes to August was, of course, Ireland's performance at the Olympics, the Paris Summer
Did you watch
Olympics.
the Olympics?
Oh, glued to it I was, Sheila.
Yeah.
I absolutely love the Olympics. Like, it's such a show. What's your favourite sport to watch? Do you have any?
Oh, I will watch anything. Do you know what I love about the Olympics? You don't have to understand sport. You can just watch it. So, like, I can't watch golf. I don't get it. I actually do enjoy sport, but for everybody, everyone can watch it. The athletics, obviously, is always going to be one of my favorites. But I love the weightlifting, and I particularly love the women. Now, I'm into weightlifting, but I see these tiny women and the power and the strength that they have, and they're flinging the weights up over their heads. Like, I am fascinated. The men are impressive, but I just love watching the female weightlifting. But you can get into anything. Like, I started watching the bouldering and the rock climbing.
That was a new one, was
So
it?
good. I think it was the previous year it was new.
Previous year. Yeah,
Oh
because
my God.
there was a good few new ones. I mean, there was the huge controversy around the Australian and the break dancing, and Ireland did, like, I mean, we're a small country, but we are unbelievable when it comes to the Olympics. Could you give us a bit of a roundup of some of our victories?
Yeah, so we sent a record 134 athletes. That was across 15 different sports, and it was our most successful Olympics in history. So our previous record was at the London Olympics, and we got 6 medals, but this time we got 7. And funny was when I was going through it, I realised we got no silvers, but anyway, that's fine. So for gold, we had Fintan McCarthy and Paula Donovan in the men's lightweight double sculls, so rowing. Daniel Whiffen won the men's 800-metre freestyle. Watching that, I was like, "Oh, Tanya!" Like, I had no voice, but that was amazing. Reese McClenaghan as well. I've actually watched him for years because I would watch the gymnastics whenever they're on. But he got the gold in the pommel horse, and he in Tokyo fell and missed out. And like, watching the gymnastics is so tense. So, oh my God, I was nearly sitting at home crying. I was like, imagine how they feel. And then we obviously had Kelly Harrington with the women's lightweight boxing, and they showed her screenings at Diamond Park, which is just in her area where she lives. And I was out there, and the kids, when I say they idolize her, like, to see these people all gathered together and everyone screaming, and they absolutely love her. So that was amazing. Bronze, Mona McSharry in the women's 100-metre breaststroke, Dara Lynch and Philip Doyle men's double sculls rowing, and Daniel Whiffen then in the men's 1500-metre freestyle. So they were all bronze medals. And can't forget that we had the 4th place finish for the relay team and Rashida Adelecki.
Yes.
And it's
Incredible.
so awful when you're just outside the medals, but like, imagine Ireland is now 4th in
I know.
athletics.
At running fast, I really did not imagine that we'd be great at running fast with our little legs, but look at us,
Yes.
like, absolutely unbelievable stuff from those gals there. I'll move us on to September, if that's all right, Sheila. Was there any stories of note to reflect on in September?
Right, I'll give you the headlines. So, another serious story: the scoping inquiry into allegations of abuse at schools by religious orders found that there was 2,395 allegations of sexual abuse. That was in respect to 308 schools recorded by religious orders, and that ran those schools. And the allegations were made in respect of 884 distinct alleged abusers. So a number of those abusers are known to be deceased. There could be more. 17 special schools were recorded 590 allegations involving 190 alleged abusers. That's a lot of numbers, but what I would take away from that is just the extent of this across so many schools, and they're only the ones who came forward. So, you have to consider a lot of these people, it says in the inquiry, is the first time they ever discussed this. It just shows the scale of this, how many schools it went across, and obviously there's going to be so many thousands more who haven't come forward yet, because this was just the first time for even just some of these people. And just with that, a commission of investigation is meant to be established into historical abuses by the government, but they made no commitment. There's been calls for a redress scheme for survivors, but they've made no commitment to that. The Apple tax, which
The Apple
the
money.
government doesn't want. So basically on the 10th of September, the ECJ, they overturned the General Court ruling, and they restored the European Commission's decision that we are owed 13 billion in unpaid taxes from Apple. So the government back in 2016, they appealed this and they got it overturned. So they didn't want Apple to pay. They said, no, nothing was done wrong. We don't need that money. And now the court has come back to say, no, you're getting it. So that's where you'll see there was lots of voxes at the time of like, how would you spend the Apple money? And then the government making all of their promises in the election based on Apple tax money. So
I feel like it's the biggest example of an Irish, I know your grant. 13 billion and interest on top of that. Like, don't mind if I do, what we could do with that. Any other stories of note in September, Sheila?
organised crime in Ireland. People are obsessed with talking about it. So there was this huge targeted organised crime investigation, and it was done internationally, lots of other police forces across the world. And in Ireland, as part of that, they did a day of searches. They seized 15 million euro worth of drugs, 11 arrests were made. And this encrypted communication platform called Ghost, that was basically cracked worldwide. So this is how people within organised crime world used to set up hits, or they used to set up drug deals, or they used to basically organize themselves. And it was created by somebody over in Australia. I do believe that they're now trying to target him as well. But this, they said, brought down a huge route for drugs trafficking in Ireland. One of the main groups that was involved in this, family are kind of taking over from the Kinahans now, and they're called the family, it's believed, because it's two brothers.
The fact that they could crack one platform and then it would lead to all of these cases, I mean, across Europe, right, and across the world, in Australia as well, they would have used it a lot in Australia, the organised crime groups. So
we were the second highest number of users.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, my God. To October, I suppose we're starting to think about the general election a little bit more in this time. Were there any stories in October that we should be looking back on?
The big one is Kyron Durnan. That's ongoing now. So that's kind of a months long story. But for anybody who doesn't know, schoolboy Kyron Durnan, he was reported missing in August of this year. And TUSLA said that it had alerted Gardaí to a significant concern about the 8-year-old. But he was not in its care. He was not in the care of TUSLA. But it had engaged with his family. Gardaí had originally been told that Kyron was last seen 2 days before this missing persons report was filed. But it actually has since emerged through their investigations that he has not been seen since May 2022, and that was when he was 6 and a pupil at a primary school in Dundalk. So this has now been upgraded to a murder investigation. They don't believe that Kyron's still alive. Now, he previously lived at a house in Dundalk for a number of years. Gardaí searched that in October. The people in that house were no connection and nothing to do with Kyron or the case. They just happened to be living there. So Gardaí have been really clear on that.
A really unusual missing persons case. November, this was, of course, the biggest story perhaps in November was the civil sexual assault case taken by Nikita Hand against Conor McGregor. And of course, she won the case. This was a huge news story in November, wasn't it, Sheila?
Huge and like polarizing. Someone like Conor McGregor, he has a huge fan base. I mean, look at his social media. I mean, millions of people follow him, are interested in him. For a long time, he was the success story. So this case anyway, he was accused of raping Nikita Hand in a hotel in Dublin. He was found guilty in the High Court, a civil case. Now, because it was a civil case, that meant that her identity wasn't anonymous. So nothing is going to happen other than he has to pay damages to her to the cost of €248,603.60. But he also, just in the last few days, he also has to cover the costs of the court proceedings. So there was some question over whether she was going to have to pay the costs for James Lawrence, who is the second person, and his friend that was there in the hotel that night that was also accused of assaulting her. She said she had no recollection of having sex with James Lawrence. He said he did. She said, well, in that case, then it was assault. The jury found there wasn't assault there. So then there was a worry that, they said she might have to pay. That didn't happen either, but she doesn't have to pay for that. So the cost, so really the full figure is far more than almost 250,000. But like, things have come out since then. Nikita Hunt hasn't been able to go back to her home yet. She's afraid. Her home was broken into with masked men, and her partner was stabbed. It was such a widely covered case by everyone. The courtroom was packed every day, I'm told. And obviously then we've also seen it playing out online still.
No, absolutely a huge case, because Conor McGregor is such a high profile person, and oftentimes you meet people abroad, the only thing they'll know about Ireland is Conor McGregor. Now, perhaps the biggest story of the year, and very much still staying with us, is of course the general election. We've alluded to it a few times now. What are some of the key takeaways of Ireland's 2024 general election, Sheila?
Yeah, so the big stories were that Gerry Hutch ran in Dublin Central. He is the head of an organised crime gang, nearly beating Marie Sherlock of Labour. Although there's obviously been criticism that he shouldn't be made a celebrity out of, but look, that is what happened. Some of the other points throughout the campaign, there was 2 debates. There was a leaders debate with 10 of them, and there was a leaders debate with 3 of them, both on RTE. Sinn Féin were coming off the back of a number of controversies. Niall O'Donnell, the senator who had sent inappropriate messages, and the former Sinn Féin press officer, Michael McMonigal, he was jailed for child sex offences. They were coming off that. Simon Harris got caught out in Kanturk, where he was filmed kind of being quite dismissive to a care worker. The results were Greens lost nearly all of their seats. The only one to keep their seat was Roderick O'Gorman, leader of the Green Party. He says that this is now going into a rebuilding phase. He's accepted they won't be in the next government, and that he's going to be kind of behind the scenes. I was in his constituency, and I've never seen a sense of relief on somebody so much as when he got elected. No far-right candidates secured any seats. Sinn Féin didn't do as well as 2020, although they still did well. I mean, they're still ahead of Fine Gael, so, they probably aren't disappointed. Good election for Labour and the Social Democrats, 11 seats each, although the Soc Dems are now down to 10 because Owen Hayes, newly elected TD, lied to the media and said that he had divested his shares in a company that was supporting the IDF. So that's another thing altogether that's happening recently. But it ended with Fianna Fáil 48 seats, Fine Gael 38 seats, and Sinn Féin 39 seats. So we're in government talks at the minute. Not expected that there'll be a government before Christmas, and it does look like it's going to be Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, and possibly independents, unless Labour decide to come in on it. But it does look like it's going to be a number of independents that are coming in with them. And then the next question will be, will they do a co-sharing Taoiseach? Because Fine Gael's new favourite phrase is parity of esteem, but Fianna Fáil is like, well, we've more seats than you, so no. But we'll see what happens there.
It's interesting because when you were talking about the local elections earlier on, Fianna Fáil did worse, like they lost seats, but they have done well in the general election. So, I mean, I don't know what it was. Maybe it was Fine Gael and Simon Harris, that Kanturk interaction, really, I don't know.
You also have an awful lot of Fine Gael TDs weren't standing again. So they had a lot of new candidates coming into
that's
it.
true.
And, incumbency is a huge part of elections. And also Fianna Fáil, they felt that they were very much played down in the polls. They were critical of the polls, not putting them high enough. They're probably right now looking at it. But just a big thing as well, Minister Stephen Donnelly lost his seat. Minister for Tourism, Arts, Gaeltacht, Media, Sport, everything. Catherine Martin lost her seat, and Anne Robbitt lost her seat. So 26 in total lost their seats, but those are the big names.
Yeah, for the Minister for Health to lose his seat, that's a huge thing. But I suppose it probably speaks to the state of the healthcare in Ireland, which, of course, was a huge topic when it came to the debates and on the doors and all that kind of stuff. Another thing was how low the voter turnout was. It was the lowest since the state began at only 59.7%. And I know that there has been a lot of discussion since that's probably not reflected very well, because there's a lot of people who are registered to vote who don't live in the country anymore. Like myself, I do not live in Ireland anymore, and there was a polling card sent to me, and sure, I'm counted in that amount of people who were not there. So I have a lot to say on that, and I have a lot to say on the fact that the postal vote does not exist in Ireland.
My sister is also in Spain. She's in Barcelona, and similarly she was like, I want to vote. She was like I will come home, but yeah, not allowed.
So look, I don't know if they're going to do anything about it, but I would love to see that change, because nothing's going to change in the government if the people who, like all these young people who have emigrated, left Ireland because they cannot afford to live here, or they cannot have the life that they want, or they have a better one elsewhere, they then don't have a say in the government.
It was a huge topic. We all thought immigration was going to be the big topic. Actually, emigration, I think, was even a bigger. And people just disappointed to see. Every time I spoke to someone, it was parents saying, I'm sick of seeing my kids leaving. I want I want them to be able to have a house here and not have to live somewhere else that they don't want to live. Yeah. So
yeah.
Yeah,
That's
it's a
it.
huge topic.
They've kind of also been the stories of December as well. Owen Hayes trying to form a doll. God knows that'll be next year sometime and all of that. So we'll keep an eye out for the rest of this year. But usually at this time of year, it kind of starts to wind down a little bit, doesn't it, Sheila?
The only is it 2 weeks left and it's Christmas holidays. So
Yeah.
then that's when we start doing all of our nice Christmassy stories about people doing nice charity things and about kids doing cute things. That's fun.
Exactly. And the Late Late Toy Show, the appeal, I mean,
Yes.
raised a huge amount of money for children's charities, which is phenomenal. So thank you so much, Sheila, for bringing us through 2024. My God, it's been a busy year. When you look back on it like that, you were busy anyways.
And like we touched on a few things.
Oh,
Like
we only scraped the surface.
I always say, news never sleeps.
Thank you so much for that. I want to ask you the question, though, that I ask all of my guests, and you are no exception,
Yeah.
even though this is a little bit of a different type of episode to what I usually do. But of course, to honour the name of the podcast, Sheila, what does it mean to be Irish?
I think it means being part of a community and being a positive person and force and whatever it is within that. When I thought about this question a lot, and I think the reason I haven't left Ireland is that I love it here. And yes, there are lots of things that aren't okay, that should be better, that we would all like to be better. But I think you don't change that and make it better. And you could live a very unhappy life if you dwell on all of those things. And so we should absolutely be trying to, within the means that we have, the communities that we have, and the spaces that we occupy, try and make that a really positive place. And I think that's what, as Irish people, we've always been very welcoming. We've always celebrated who we are and being Irish and our country. And I think we need to take that down to like a small level and do it wherever it is that we are. When I lived in Monaghan, people used to say, "She's what's up there?" And I'd be like, loads. You just have to go out and find it. Like, go join groups, go be part of things, and go be in positive things that take you away from some of the news. You know, when people say they don't listen to the news, I'm like, that's fine. So being Irish to me is definitely about a sense of community, whatever that looks like. And if that community look changes, that we also embrace that, because we've been really, really good at change in Ireland and accepting kind of new things and new ways. I think even some of the news stories there show that. And I people will know if they follow me online, I've had a history with mental health issues and an eating disorder, and I at the time was very angry at the system and things like that. But I actually thought I can be annoyed about that, or I can make this something that in the future is more positive, or that I can make a difference in. So that's what being Irish is to me. Being part of it, being part of community and being positive. Yeah.
The community is a very, very important thing. It's something that keeps coming up with a lot of my guests, but people are really, they're trying to tap into that a little bit more. I'm delighted to hear that you had such a lovely time in Monaghan. I'm sure, I don't know if you ever called up to Sound Quality Gifts, Helen Drum.
Yes, I did.
But she is a hoot, my God. I love her. I love her
I used
stuff.
to go up because I used to do recitations, and she used to have CDs of old recitations because you couldn't buy CDs anywhere anymore, but you could with
Of
Helen.
course, yeah, because she used to be a CD shop. I was listening to her talk about it
Mm-hmm.
before. Anyways, thank you so much, Sheila. I hope that you have a fantastic Christmas. I hope you get a little bit of a bit of a rest. I know you're up early every morning and doing your research and reporting for Morning Ireland. So I really appreciate you coming in this evening and giving us a rundown of all of the top news stories of 2024 in Ireland. Gurv Mila Mila Mahagut.
Thank you.
That's all for us reeling in the year that was 2024. I'll be taking a well-earned break now next week because it is Christmas week, and I'll be back then at the very start of 2025 with a very special interview with an Irish food and drink influencer. So I'll see you then. Also, not to forget, the 29th of December is actually the 100-day mark of How to Be Irish existing. So I'm really excited to celebrate that. I can't believe 100 days already, that kind of flew. I'm really grateful to all of my wonderful guests that have come on to date. And also, I really appreciate all of the well wishes from my listeners so far. So thank you so much for your time, your energy, and for sharing all of that with me. And I'm really excited to do some more in 2025.